Đến dự diễn đàn hôm nay, ban tổ chức xin trân trọng giới thiệu ông Andrew Jeffries, Giám đốc Quốc gia Ngân hàng Phát triển châu Á tại Việt Nam sẽ lên trình bày tham luận với chủ đề Kinh tế khu vực và những xu hướng lớn về hợp tác kinh tế quốc tế hiện nay. Xin trân trọng kính mời ông.
His Excellency, Mr. Minh, Politburo Member and Prime Minister, His Excellency, Mr. Quận, Politburo Member and Chairman of the Economic Commission, all distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I have a great honor to be here today and share with you some of our views on the regional economy, current trends in regional economic cooperation, and then we'll quickly present some policy recommendations. So starting with the pandemic, this year the most infectious Omicron variant has driven recent pandemic developments in the world. In developing Asia, which is shown in the black line on the left chart, new daily infections declined from January to February, surged in March, and then started to dip in April. What happened specifically in Vietnam follows closely with these trends. Higher vaccination coverage and Omicron's milder health impact allowed authorities to keep containment measures rather relaxed, and as a result, economic activities fared relatively well this year as compared to last. This is particularly the case in Vietnam, thanks to the high vaccination rate, enabling a more flexible response, and thus economic activities to continue. The Purchasing Managers Index for Manufacturing and Services, a measure of the prevailing direction of economic trends in manufacturing, remained above the 50 mark in early 22. Being above 50 represents expansion, while figures below 50 represent contraction. The PMIs of major Asian economies are shown in the table on the right. The one exception is the People's Republic of China, where the tough containment measures and part of the zero COVID approach led to manufacturing PFI falling below 50 in January. And it's been worse more recently. So turning to the outlook, with positive developments on the pandemic front and economic reopening, exports and so far robust domestic demand will underpin continued recovery in developing Asia. But growth will remain uneven across subregions and among countries. South Asia is expected to continue to grow strongly, supported by robust domestic demand. Growth will pick up in Southeast Asia and the Pacific, and normalize in East Asia, and slow in the Caucasus and Central Asia. However, fiscal consolidations and interest rate increases in response to the U.S. Federal Reserve tightening complicates this outlook. While on the positive side, border reopenings will begin to benefit tourism-dependent economies. While baseline growth forecasts, which were done several months ago, remain relatively robust, there's now more downside risks that cloud the horizon. Escalation of the Russia-Ukraine war could worsen the fallout in developing Asia, both via direct and indirect channels. Persistently high inflation in the US and Europe are prompting sharper than earlier than expected rate hikes, which trigger financial volatility, capital outflows, and currency depreciations in the region. Regional economies with heightened macroeconomic vulnerabilities could be significantly challenged by these negative spillovers. Again, I think Vietnam's relatively low public debt levels and prudent fiscal management during the pandemic makes it more resilient to these external pressures as compared to many other developing countries in the region. Now, I know everyone's tired of hearing this, and I'm tired of saying it, but COVID-19 remains a threat. New virus variants could endanger the region's economy. And And the current outbreaks in China and its zero COVID policy is damaging their growth and could complicate the region's recovery. And economic scarring from the pandemic remains a significant medium-term risk. And returning to inflation, while loose monetary and fiscal policies in the US and Europe and a rebounded economic recovery have caused demand pull inflation, the supply chain constraints in China and from the Russian invasion of Ukraine and high energy and commodity prices are more of a cost push form of inflation for many Asian economies, including Vietnam. And I note that cost push inflation pressure puts central banks in the region in a very difficult situation, including Vietnam. Monetary authorities in the region need to guard against any incipient inflationary pressures. But many of the tools at their disposal to do so would be in contradiction to the accommodative policies needed to ensure economic recovery. So transitioning to matters of economic cooperation, I'll mention some points on 8 important areas. All are strategically important to Vietnam, given Vietnam's open economy with investment, manufacturing, and exports, such an important part of Vietnam's ongoing and future growth. First is trade. Asia and the Pacific sustained strong intra-regional trade linkages amid the pandemic. The region's intra-regional trade share even rose by 1 percentage point from 2019 to 2020, the highest since 1990. The modest increase in the region's intra-regional trade share during the pandemic is mainly due to linkages with China, which was first to ease off its mobility restrictions, and given they are such a large trading partner in the region. If you exclude China, the region's intra-regional share declined marginally between 2019 and 2020. And going forward, the regional Asian free trade agreements are driving trade liberalization and are expected to shape trade patterns in the post-pandemic world. Second is foreign direct investment. The pandemic weighed down foreign domestic in 2020 for obvious reasons. From 1.5 trillion in 2019, FDI overall slipped by over a third in 2020 to less than 1 trillion. This brings a new trough for FDI, with 2020 figures about 20% lower than in 2009 in the wake of the global financial crisis. Developed economies felt more of the pinch in 2020. FDI in developed economies fell by roughly 58%. Meanwhile, FDI to developing economies inched up by 8%. So despite the gloomy scenario in 2020, FDI flows showed strong rebound in 2021, up 77% and surpassing their pre-COVID-19 level. This is according to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. And 2022 figures remain positive, but uneven among regions and countries. Global value chains and regional value chains have been gradually in decline since 2018 amid growing uncertainties surrounding the trade policy environment in many parts of the world and sluggish world demand. When the pandemic struck in 2020, global slowdown from constrained mobility and disrupted supply chains pulled down global value chain participation further to 70.7%, lower than the 71.4% reported in 2009 during the global financial crisis. Asia's global value chain participation has also fallen over the same period, with Asia's value linkages with the world dipping to 65.7% in 2020. But value chains within Asia shows an upward trend, shown by the green line in the graph, such that deepening regional value chain integration is on the rise. Related to value chains is supply chain management. The experience of the pandemic provided key lessons toward enhancing supply chain resilience and essential goods. Deeper international cooperation will be needed to ensure continuous supply of critical goods during crises. A good example from the pandemic is that about 2/3 of the 20 APEC economies implemented electronic submissions of trade-related documents and expedited simplified customs procedures, similar to priority lanes for essential goods, to mitigate congestion at major ports. Open trade and facilitation will continue to play a key role in economic recovery and development. Countries should refrain from using export restrictions and other non-tariff barriers, and more work is needed to leverage information and communications technology to streamline customs procedures and electronic exchange of information, as well as implement national and regional single windows for document submissions and clearance. Digital technologies can help mitigate vulnerabilities to existing supply chains for enhanced monitoring, market research, and new supply chain development. For example, the pandemic caused the global need for personal protective equipment. Monitoring the use of the distribution as well as centralizing visibility of orders can benefit from digital technologies. Similarly, food supplies can be improved through online platforms, reducing food waste, farmers' losses, and getting rid of some multiple layers of intermediaries. Fifth is related to cross-border financial transactions, in this case specifically remittances from overseas workers. These contracted in 2021 for clear reasons. However, they improved in 2020 they contracted. They improved in 2021, growing for most of the selected Asia and Pacific economies, but not all. Other regions, such as Latin America and the Caribbean, also reported rising remittances. The rise in 2021 might be due to economic recovery in host economies, but also the shift from cash to digital transfers, as well as from informal to formal channels. Tourism is an important recipient of regional cooperation. The overall weakness in tourism due to the pandemic wreaked havoc amongst a lot of livelihoods and businesses. In 2021, however, domestic flights within countries improved in the first half of 2021, particularly in the People's Republic of China, but numbers dropped again there in the second half of 2021. Meanwhile, international flights in the Asia-Pacific region lagged other regions in 2021, as the region remained mostly closed for passenger air travel. Now, given how badly tourism fared in the pandemic, regional cooperation to help trigger its recovery is very important given this industry can create a number of jobs and livelihoods. Specific to Vietnam, Vietnam actively participates in the ASEAN, the Greater Mekong sub-region, and other regional tourism cooperation programs. Benefits include helping accelerate economic recovery by facilitating information sharing, working towards harmonized or streamlined cross-border travel requirements, and return to pre-19 tourist entry requirements. In 2019, Vietnam received an all-time high of 18 million international visitors that generated more than $11 billion in tourism receipts. So a quick rebound is essential to get back on track towards attaining the government's growth targets for international visitors and the commensurate growth in tourism-related jobs by 2030. Climate change is another area requiring extensive international cooperation. I see I'm running low on time. We've seen so far at least 74 countries up until the COP26 event in Glasgow last year, and now 81 countries and counting have announced new commitments or indicated ongoing work toward new targets. This slide shows some of the major announcements from the People's Republic of China, the EU, the UK. In addition, Japan and the Republic of Korea have also committed to achieve net zero by 2050. And 11 developing countries within Asia, ADB's developing member country list have made such commitments, including Vietnam. These also include Bhutan, Fiji, China, Kazakhstan, Laos, Maldives, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. Such commitments are challenging for any country, particularly developing countries with fast growth rates, including Vietnam. They're not just faced with replacing existing supply stock with cleaner sources of energy, but must need to rapidly expand their overall supply continually over the next few decades while simultaneously lowering emissions. The affordability of the required changes are a larger issue for developing countries as opposed to developed countries. Developed countries need to better understand these challenges, which places great importance on climate finance and concessional sources to lower the cost of this transition and for stepped up technical cooperation. So I'm running out of time. The last is digital transformation. Asia has lagged in some of the digital FDI due to some regulatory restrictions. But this is, an important agenda of the Vietnam government, and rightly so. And so just lastly, I'll stop here with quick policy recommendations. I was going to read through these 6 in more detail, but I'm out of time, and so to keep things going, I'll be happy to discuss those or provide more information later. But just very quickly, they include, to continue to diversify Vietnam's market access for trade. Vietnam has a very large and diverse set of free trade agreements. However, 28% of total exports in 2021 went to the United States, 16% to the People's Republic of China. So just in the spirit of resilience, further diversification would be beneficial over time. Of course, improving the business environment for attracting more foreign direct investment, increasing domestic firms' participation in global value chains. This is very important for Vietnam. Strengthening trade facilitation, include improving logistics services and digitalization of customs procedures. And then, of course, implementing the net zero commitments, which is not just a global good, but also a matter of competitiveness, given foreign direct investments have their own global climate commitments, and they are looking for clean sources of energy when they invest in developing countries. And also there's more scrutiny going forward on the carbon footprints of goods by consumers and by importing countries. So as an export-oriented country, there's some competitive reasons for taking on this quite impressive and daunting challenge of emissions. And lastly, the digital transformation, which could benefit the entire economy, but the particular challenges with small and medium-sized enterprises, given they constitute such a large number of total enterprises in the country and have an important role to play for job creation and growth. So I'll end there just by stressing the importance of regional global cooperation, particularly in the context that risks for fragmentation of this cooperation are growing. So many of these topics merit a full presentation in and of themselves, but I wish to thank the Central Economic Commission for inviting me to speak this afternoon. Thank you. I wish you all health, happiness, and success.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andrew. I'm sorry that sometimes we are not generous in terms of time provision.